when you see the process for nutrition and dietetic practice, the first one will be identification of nutritional need, and you will use dietary assessment during when you identify the nutritional need, and also when you do the assessment. So you have anthropometric, biochemical, diet, and also what else you have? Anthropometric, biochemical, diet, and also another one.
Clinical findings?
Yes, good. Clinical findings. So dietary assessment is one of the components which you must be competent. Okay. So there are actually 4 reasons to measure diet. Okay. So the first one is to assess and monitor food and nutrient intake. And the second one is to conducting epidemiologic research. When you do epidemiologic research, you need to measure diet. The third reason is for commercial purpose. So this is more to those who are working in companies. So you measure diet for commercial purpose. And the fourth reason is to formulate and evaluate government health and agriculture policy. So those who are working in government sectors, you usually measure diet to formulate and evaluate the policies. So let's look at the first reason, to assess and monitor. Okay, so this is to ensure the adequacy of food supply in the country, and also to estimate the adequacy of dietary intakes of individuals and also in a group of population. Okay, and you also measure dietary intake to monitor trends in food and nutrient consumption, and finally to estimate exposure to food additives and contaminants. So what is the most popular assessment of diet that you use to assess and monitor the population's nutritional status? What is the most popular venue that we use in Malaysia? Can anybody suggest us? Anybody? What is the name of event when we assess and monitor the population's dietary intake? Nope. So have you heard of Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey?
Yeah, I heard that, but
okay, so that is the place where we assess and monitor the dietary intake of the population using Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey. And also another venue that we use is the National Health and Mobility Survey. It's on the screen. Okay, National Health and Mobility Survey. The latest one is 2019. So these are sort of the findings when you assess and monitor the dietary intake. You can identify the top 10 foods which is consumed by Malaysian adults on a daily basis, which are not very. So you have a figure there, and then you can also know the percentage of individuals adhering to dietary guidelines. Example here is on fruits and vegetables. So 95% of Malaysian adults do not eat the recommended daily amount of both fruits and vegetables. So how do they know that? Is by assessing dietary intake. Okay, so the second reason is for epidemiologic research. So when we say epidemiologic research, means we are studying the relationship between diet and also health outcomes. So we want to know whether the intake of certain foods will increase or decrease the disease. Normally will be non-communicable disease like CHD, diabetes, cancer, and so on. So we can also identify groups at risk of developing disease because of their diet and also their nutrient intake. So we can identify, oh, these people are consuming low fruits and vegetables. These are the groups who are consuming high carcinogens. So they are at risk for certain types of disease. So diet is #1 risk factor in the global burden of disease. And we can see that all those in green bars are disease risk factors linked to diet. So and the yellow bars are disease risk factors not linked to diet. So there are a lot of bars in green than in yellow. Okay. The third reason is for commercial purpose. So this is for those who are in the industry. They are very interested to know the dietary intake of the population, and they measure their diet, or they use the information from studies to for commercial purpose. So I have 4 examples here of advertisement used by food industry, which is not, I'm not saying that this is wrong, but this is what they use dietary data for. So the first one is they identify that 50% of people think they don't eat enough whole grain because they do not know and they do not understand the benefits of doing so. So when they identify that, then they can promote whole grain products from their company. And we have also Quaker here from PepsiCo. They are using data on waist circumference and prevalence of obesity to promote their products here. And sometimes advertising campaigns are used to develop new products. Example like Marigold Peel Fresher. So they produce things that can be used on the go. They produce their products in bottles so that people can consume on the go, because they know that the consumption of fruits and vegetables is quite low among the population. And finally, we have Ajinomoto, if I'm not mistaken. When we identify the population is consuming high salt diet, so they come up with recipes for low sodium recipes in their advertisement to promote their product. So we are not saying that this is wrong, but this is how people use dietary intake data to for commercial purpose. Okay. And this should be the fourth reason. There's a typo there. Formulate and evaluate policies. So dietary assessment data is used for planning food production and distribution. They will identify what types of foods to be produced and what types of food to be distributed, imported, exported, and so on. And the country also used dietary data to establish food and nutrition regulations and establishing programs for nutrition education and disease risk reduction. And finally, we use dietary data to evaluate the success and cost effectiveness of nutrition education and disease risk reduction. So this is more on policy. We need data on the dietary intake of the population to formulate and evaluate policy. So in Malaysia, we have National Plan of Action for Nutrition of Malaysia 3, which you might be familiar with. This is the third series for year 2016 to 2025. So this is one example of policies that is using dietary data to formulate and evaluate the policies. So there are a lot more policies in the country, and not only one. So there are 3 approaches to measuring diet. The first one is by looking at the research design consideration. So when we say that the approach to measure diet is how do they select which type of dietary assessment techniques to be used. So it is based on the research design consideration. Number 2 is based on the characteristics of study participants. And finally, by looking at the available resources. So these are the 3 approaches to measure diet. So we will go one by one. The first approach is by looking at research design. So if you are conducting a correlational studies, so we just need a rough estimate of dietary intake, which we can see from the food disappearance studies. So we will see what are the methods of dietary techniques of dietary intake later on. So for now, we just accept that correlational studies just need a rough estimate, and food disappearance studies can be conducted to measure dietary intake. The second research design is surveys of cross-sectional studies. These are to collect information on the current diet or the dietary habit in the immediate past. Let's say 1 year ago, 2 years ago, before the disease, and so on. So for this type of studies, which we normally do in our research project, so we need to select tools that measure current diet and also immediate past diet. And when we go to cross-sectional studies, case control studies, so we require methods that measure dietary intake in the recent past, example, 10 years ago in the childhood, because we want to see the association of dietary intake and the disease. So the association might not be related to immediate past or current diet. It might be related to the dietary practice 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or during the childhood. Okay, so we want to measure or we want to use a method that people can recall their diet in a long-term period. And the fourth common research design is longitudinal or cohort studies, where we follow the participants longitudinally. So we require methods that measure current diet or dietary habits in the immediate past. So this is similar to surveys or cross-sectional studies. Okay, so these are the approaches based on research design. The second approach is by looking at the study participant. So if the study participants are unable to read or write, so we must select methods that use interviewer administered methods. So means that you cannot ask them to fill up a form or measure their own diet by weighing the diet or recalling themselves. Okay, so we must interview them so that to gather information of their dietary intake. If the study participant is very young or elderly or developmentally disabled, victims of stroke or Alzheimer's disease, or they have died, so they have limited ability to communicate with the interviewer. So normally we use a surrogate source or direct observation. A surrogate source means that people who are taking care of them, they can report their dietary intake on behalf of the participant itself. Or we can also use direct observation, where we observe, we sit with them the whole day and we observe what they consume, or we can record them using CCTV or things like that. Okay. And the third concern among study participants are the ethnic population. So sometimes we need some modification of existing methods. Let's say you are instructed to collect dietary data of orang asli in Gombak. So you cannot use the same method that you use for measuring a group of office workers. So there must be some modification of the existing methods. And possibly the interview should be done by person of same ethnic or cultural background. So sometimes when you want to interview people in, let's say we are going back to the orang asli example. So we must have somebody with us to translate and also to understand the cultural background before we interviewed the participants. So we cannot go there and ask them, what do you eat for breakfast? Maybe the culture there, they don't have breakfast, maybe. Okay, So or it is wrong to ask what you have eaten the previous day maybe. So there are some cultural factors to take into account when you interview specific ethnic population. The third approach is resources. So you have several resources. The first one is budget. Your dietary intake assessment method that you choose must be according to your budget. So budget should be carefully considered, and it must cost match with available resources. The second resources that we would like to look at is training of participants or interviewers. So sometimes when the study is large, so you have several interviewers. So to avoid inconsistencies in methods being used, so there must be a training among the interviewers. And for studies involving dietary assessment, which the participants need to record themselves, so there must be some sort of training for the participants on how to record a good quality diet records. And the third resource is on the label to enter dietary data. So normally when we are using or we choose to use food records or 24-hour diet records, there are quite a large amount of labor needed to enter data into the computer for nutrient intake analysis. So as I was mentioning previously, when we do dietary assessment, there are several steps. It is not only that you interview the subjects and then it's done. So after you interview the subjects, you must clean your data. You might also want to recode your data, do some scorings, and also finally you will enter the data into a software. So the tedious part is besides interviewing the participants is on the entering data part. So if you have hundreds or thousands of 24-hour diet records to enter into a software, it will take some time and labor to complete the task. But if you are using methods like food frequency questionnaire, where you can have a template, and then we just insert certain information into the template, and the nutrient will be calculated automatically for us. So the labor is quite low. So that is in terms of labor to enter data. And finally, is number of participants. So the number of participants is used to decide the best method of dietary intake assessment. So if the study only involves a small number of participants, so we can choose diet recall or food records. So this is related to labor and also budget. Okay, and when you have a large number of participants, so you might be interested to use food frequency questionnaire in measuring diet, because you have a lot of participants, and this will reduce the labor to enter the data, and also time and cost to conduct this, the dietary assessment. So later we will see for each dietary assessment methods, what are the pros and cons related to the method. Okay. So this is the last slide for the first part. So there are several techniques in measuring diet. Okay. So it is based on the level of measurement that we are interested in. So if we are interested to see the dietary intake of at the population level, so a food balance sheet is a best method for measuring diet. And if you are interested to just know the dietary intake of the household, so food account is, or previously I said food disappearance study. So food account or food disappearance studies is a similar term. So it's a best method to measure diet. But most of the time, we are interested to measure the individual intake of diet. So there are 6 methods that we will cover in the next part of this lecture. So the first one is 24-hour diet recall, and then we have food record or diary, and we have food frequency questionnaire, and then we have the 4th method is diet history questionnaire. The 5th method is duplicate food collections. And finally, we have photographic or video records. So there are a lot of other techniques, emerging techniques for measuring diet. But in our lecture, we will cover all this. Okay. So any questions so far? Especially for those who are listening this for the first time. Any questions before we move to the second part?